While Horizon definitely stole the show during Shopify's recent Summer 2025 edition, Shopify also slipped in something called Storefront Web Components. As Shopify writes here, Shopify Web Components lets you bring Shopify-powered commerce capabilities to any website, display products, showcase collections, and offer a checkout, all with a few lines of embedded HTML. As the name suggests, Storefront Web Components is simply a collection of custom elements that enables you to render content from your Shopify store on any website. But this update is a little more than that. It also comes with a new sales channel by the name of Headless, easily allowing the generation of Storefront API credentials that you can use for creating these headless storefronts. Personally, I find it interesting that Shopify have invested the time to do this. The Shopify Storefront API has been around for years, but perhaps Shopify realized it was a little bit too technical to have to write GraphQL queries to retrieve the data and then render that content to the front end. So instead, the new Storefront Web Components make it so that you don't need to write a single line of GraphQL, making it almost as easy as writing Liquid in a theme in order to pull relevant data from your store. So without further ado, let's dive right into how we can implement Storefront Web Components on our own websites. All right, guys, so this should be a pretty fun demo. What I've got here is I've got a pretty bare bones project here, just the one index.html file and some CSS so that we have some nice styling. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add some Storefront Web Components in here and talk you through how to do this. So the first step to using Storefront Web Components on our website is to include the script tag. So here you can see we can now import web components from this file on Shopify's CDN. And this right here, I believe it'll probably be minimized or minified, I should say. But within here is all of the web components. Okay, so in order to use them, of course, we need to import them into our project. Over in my browser, I've got the project running through live server on Visual Studio Code, which is super simple. All you got to do is click this button down here and it runs a live server. I'm going to be connecting to my new Chris Horizon store that I created in reaction to Shopify Editions 2025. I've made hardly any changes to this development store. As you can see, if we go into products, I created this store in my partner's account with all the demo products. So we've got some stuff to work with here. Obviously, you're going to need a store to connect to in order to follow along. And for me, it's just this development store, Chris Horizon. I've also got the Storefront API documentation open. Instead of the Shopify Liquid documentation, we're going to be using the Storefront API documentation in order to figure out what attributes and properties are available on different objects. And finally, this getting started guide from Shopify on their official docs. It does a pretty good job of explaining how to get started. If you want to just skip this video completely and read this and do it in your own time, you can feel free. But if you want to follow along, I'm going to take you through this process and show you how we're able to easily create a functioning e-commerce site through these web components with not that much code. Okay, so as you can see here, step one is to connect your store. We're going to need to install the Headless channel from the Shopify App Store. I did that previously, so I'm going to show a recording of that on your screen right now. You just install the Headless channel from the Shopify App Store and it shows up in your list of sales channels. The reason why we need this app is because we're going to generate an access token. So I'll show you that on your screen now. As you can probably see from the recorded video, I am grabbing that access token so that I can use it, as it says here in number 4, in my project in the Shopify store component. Okay, so as you can see, got a very nice example right here. So speaking of components, let's go and have a look at our list of components here. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and some are more complicated than others. But the one we need to start with, as it says here, is Shopify-store. So if we have a look at the documentation for this, as you can see, it's pretty well documented. We just need to add this Shopify store component as a gateway for our Shopify store to insert into our page. All right, so this is like the overall wrapper that we're going to be using. Okay, so I might just take the example code right here just to make it easier for myself. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste it after the body tag. Now, obviously this is placeholder content. So I'm going to replace this with my own store. So chrishorizon.myshopify.com, and then the access token, which I'll paste in right here. The country is not going to be Canada. I believe that's the country code for Canada. Let's say it's going to be United States, and I don't want the language to be, I'm assuming this is French. I want it to be EN for English, okay? Now, as Shopify states on their official documentation, probably not here, but maybe in the Getting Started article, if you're working with a single storefront, you can add the Shopify context component, which we're going to add to our page. Anywhere on the page, it doesn't have to be nested within the Shopify Store Web Component. But if you are working with multiple storefronts on the same website, I'm not sure why you would be doing that, then you will need to nest it. So as you can see up here, we're closing the Shopify Store component tag before we write more of our code. So you can either wrap it or you can just close it before you even get into the other tags here. I'm going to wrap it just as a personal preference. So I'm going to place the closing Shopify Store tag above the closing body tag. And now our whole body is wrapped with this connection to our Shopify store. So now that we have our body content wrapped within this Shopify store, basically a provider, we can now move on to step 2, which is to set the context. Now, in order to explain this, what I'm going to do is draw an analogy between Shopify Liquid and Storefront Web Components. So when we're working with Shopify themes, if I write the code product.title in order to get the title from the product object, which product object are we looking at? Well, it depends on the context, right? And within Shopify themes, if I was on a product template, the product object would be representing the page of the product that I'm currently on. Or if I'm looping through a bunch of products on a collection, for instance, the product object within each iteration would be whatever product that's coming through in that collection via that loop. So in the same way, what we're doing here when we're setting the context in Storefront Web Components is we're essentially specifying an object, a resource to look at, and then with that context established, we can then pull data off that specific object, okay? So let me show you what I mean by that. So here you can see we've got an example here with Shopify context. We're looking for a product object, and the way we're going to specify which product object is via the product handle, right? Now, because this is going to render via JavaScript, we're going to put all the code within this into a template HTML element. A template element is something that doesn't render on the page, but allows us to put HTML on the page to use within JavaScript, okay? So switching over to my project here, I want to put in a product card. So I've got a class for card here. Excuse all the AI suggestions, they can be kind of annoying sometimes. But of course, if I start referencing product.title and look at the image here, it doesn't have context. So I'm going to wrap this card in a Shopify context web component. Okay, so I need to nest this in here, but not only do I need to nest this in here, I need to nest this within a template, and then Shopify will use that template to insert the dynamic content that we place within this card based on the product that we're looking at, which in this case is the collection snowboard liquid. So this handle relates to a product in my store. So if I go over to my store and look in my products, the collection snowboard liquid is this one. So we can see down here, this matches the handle. So we're going to be pulling in information from this product. Okay. So still we have nothing, we have the empty card right now. So what we need to do is actually bring in some Shopify data. How we do this, and I'm going to once again use the analogy from Liquid. If we were in Liquid, we'd be using a Liquid tag to write something like this, product.title. But we're not in Liquid, we're in Storefront Web Components. So how do we bring this in? We do so via the Shopify data, I believe it's called, Web Components. So if I go over here and look at the documentation for components, we have a component called Shopify data, and this allows us to bring in data based on the context that we're in. Okay, so as you can see here, I can just copy this code right here, and I don't want it broken up onto multiple lines. Let me just fix that up. And as you can see here, we've got this Shopify data web component, which simply pulls data from the context, which in this case is the product object of this particular product. And then we can pull an attribute off of it, in this case, .title. This matches the attribute name in Shopify Liquid, but that's just a coincidence. We can't just trust this is going to be the same attribute name as in Liquid. Instead of looking at the Liquid documentation, as I mentioned before, we need to be looking at the Storefront API documentation. So as you might imagine, there's not really many other ways to call a title, but as we look through the properties here, we'll be able to find the title property. And as you can see here, it's the name of the product that displays to the customers. Okay, so if I go back over to here, you can see that that name is coming through. All right, so in Liquid, as I said, we would write product.title, but with Storefront Web Components, we use a Shopify data web component, and then we put the property that we're looking for on the object that we're currently in the context of inside of this query attribute. Okay, so next I want to add an image. And when it comes to images, there's a special tag. It's not the Shopify data one. If we go over to the documentation again, here you can see Shopify-media. And this accepts a reference to an image or media and generates an image or video element with source set and sizes attribute. Okay, so when we're rendering an image, we want to use Shopify media instead of Shopify data. So if we go back to here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in above our title a tag that's going to render us the product image. Now, as you can see within the query here, selected or first available variant. If this was Liquid, we would be separating each of these with an underscore. So this is clearly not Liquid. This is coming through from the Storefront API. So just to reiterate that again, you can see here that it's one of the properties listed under the product object within the Storefront API. So we just want to make sure that we're looking at the Storefront API for our property names, not the Liquid documentation, or just assuming it's going to be the same. Here, of course, with the title, it was the same, but here it is, of course, different. Now this property gives us, as it reads, the selected or first available variant. So in order to get the image from that, we'll just need to chain a .image, and then we'll specify a width and height. So if I save that and then go over to my store over here, you can see that the image for that particular product comes through. And if we inspect the code, we can see something interesting here. If I expand this out, you can see that the Shopify media web component is set to display contents, which means that the box is missing. And so this width and height basically is going into the child image, and it preloads it with the max width and max height of 300. So if I change this to 200 right here, and we take a look at the image again, you'll see how it manifests in the code is it changes the max width of the actual image element within this Shopify media web component. Okay, so I'm going to take that back to 300, and let's now bring in the price. Now for the price, we're going to use another special component, not the Shopify data component. We're going to use the Shopify money component because we want the price to come back with the nice format. So again, to draw the analogy between Liquid and Storefront Web Components, if I was to bring in the price, I could say product price and then filter through this money filter. And then I could also set optionally the specific money format that I wanted the price to show up in. In Storefront Web Components, what we do instead is I'll just paste in the code right here inside this p tag. And as you can see here in the query attribute, we're looking at that selected or first available variant property on the product object, and then we're looking at the price. Okay, now the price, as in Liquid, is going to come back in a raw format. So we insert it into this web component, and we can tell the web component through this format attribute what kind of format we want. Okay, so if I go over here, you can see that the price is now coming through in a nice human readable format. Okay, I'm going to close this down because I'm going to now switch over to a different example where we bring in a list of products. So I'm going to go back into the documentation here, and you can see next to Shopify context, we have Shopify list context. This allows us to display multiple items in a repeating format. We can consider this like a for loop in Shopify. So instead of putting in this singular specific product, what I might do is add in a list of products. So again, to draw the analogy from Liquid to Storefront Web Components, how I would do this in Liquid is I would say for product in and whatever the list of products is. So probably from collection.products and the for loop here. And then I could access properties on each product in the array of products on the collection like such. In Storefront Web Components, what we do is we can actually keep this code within the template because we're going to be running the same code for each loop iteration. But I need to change this from Shopify context to Shopify list context. And we're not going to specify a specific product here because we're specifying a list. Here I can put in a very simple query of products, which we don't see in Shopify Liquid, but this array is within the Storefront API. Let me actually put list in front of context here, list context. And just like we would in GraphQL, I'm going to specify how many of these I want. Let's just say 4, okay? So now if I go back over to here, you'll see that we get 4 products being loaded up. The minimal snowboard, I believe, doesn't have an image. That's why it's showing like that. So maybe I just do 3 because I am working off a reduced window here for this tutorial. And now you can see we've got the same product card 3 times, but with different products in each. All right, so this is cool. We could, create a product page for each of these. And then if you click on them, you go to the product page. But I'm going to do it as a single page application. And I'm going to allow quick add to cart directly from these cards. And in Shopify themes, this would actually be quite an involved process. You would have to build a cart. You'd have to send requests to the Cart Ajax API and then respond back to them. But in Storefront Web Components, we can get a lot of functionality with not much code. And how we do that is, first of all, we're going to put in the web component for Shopify Cart, okay? Again, I want to reference the documentation here. If we go over here, we've looked at context, list context, data, media, money, store. Now we're going to look at Shopify Cart, and this one's pretty powerful. It provides a mini shopping cart functionality to the website, and it has some methods on it, as you would imagine, in order to add products to this cart. Okay, so all we got to do is, like I said, just add the Shopify cart right here, and I'm going to give it an ID as well of main cart just for easier targeting. And then what I'm going to do is add in this equally handy web component right here, which you might have spotted before. I think it's the only one we haven't looked at yet, which is the variant selector. Again, these AI suggested results can be quite annoying. I might have to figure out how to turn them off. But anyways, we can just add in this code like this, no attributes, nothing special. And then suddenly we've got our variants right here. And if I switch from variant to variant, you can see pretty amazingly, because everything here is within the product context for this particular product, it actually updates all the content within this context, which is pretty cool. I don't even have to specify that I want the price to change on variant switching, which is really cool functionality right out of the gate. Now, of course, we want to be able to add one of these products to the cart. So I'm going to add an add to cart button right underneath my variant selector. Okay. So actually, I think that might be the final one. So we've got variant selected down here. And actually, that's the full list of components. So we've touched all the components within this tutorial. And as for the add to cart button, that's not actually a web component. We just need to create a button that triggers a method on the web component that is the cart. Sometimes AI can play tricks on you. As you can see here, it's assuming there is a component for that, but there is none. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a button, and then on the on-click event of the button, I'm going to trigger a method on the Shopify Cart web component. So what we're going to need to do in order to do that is to grab that web component. And because I gave that web component an ID before, I can use get element by ID to grab that element. And there's a method on there just to bring it back to the documentation. If we go to Shopify-Cart here, called add line. Okay, so we can just write add line here, and all we need to do is pass through the event. Okay, so I'll put in the event object here, and crazily enough, this is all that's needed to be done. We don't actually have to tell the component here what variant to add to the cart. It can tell just from the context. Okay, so to go back here, actually I haven't put anything in the button. So let me do that now. Add to cart. We'll go back here. So if I go 100 and I click add to cart, it's actually adding to the cart right now, unless there's any errors in the console, which there aren't, but we're not seeing it. Why aren't we seeing it? Because we also need to open up the cart as well. So we don't just need to add the product to the cart, we need to open the cart so that we can actually see what we've just added. Okay, so that's another method we have here called open, and we can chain two methods together, which I'll do in a sec, but for now I'm just going to run it in my browser. So I'll open up the console here, and then on this web component I will write, actually I don't think it's open, I think it's just show modal. Yeah, a method to display the underlying cart as a modal in the dialog element. This open property is not actually the method to open the cart. It's actually just a Boolean to check the state of the cart. My mistake, but that's all good. We have show modal to do that. And so if I run show modal, you can see here that that product actually was added to the cart, and we can see that here. And we can actually increase the quantity. We can delete that product from the cart, and it's all pretty snappy and a lot of functionality right out of the box. Okay, so obviously once we add a product to the cart, we want to chain in that show modal method. And so now to demonstrate this, if I go to, let's say, select the $50 gift card, add that to cart, you'll see it gets instantly added to the cart. And if I reduce the quantity to 0, it empties the cart. I can increase the quantity. I can go over here and add this product to the cart. It's pretty incredible. Cool. So what I'm going to do as well is I want the user to be able to open the cart whenever they want. So I'm going to add that as a button to the header right here. So just a button with the class of open cart button with the content of view cart, just running that show modal method on the web component. So now no matter where we are, we can just double check what's happening in the cart. So I can close that down, and then I can view the cart later. That content is still there and those products are still in the cart. Pretty cool if you ask me. And then after our cart is created, so let's say we want to add this gift card to the cart and this snowboard to the cart, we can simply click this checkout button to be directed to our store to complete the checkout. Of course, with Headless, we need to actually go to the Shopify store in order to process the payment and complete the order. But everything before the actual going to the checkout, including creating a cart, all of these interactions and showing the data of each product, we can do in a headless manner using the Storefront API and these new Storefront Web Components. So this one's kind of snuck under the radar of the recent announcement, but for people who want to add Shopify functionality to their existing websites, this makes it a lot easier than having to create some sort of app using the Storefront API. It's still powered by the Storefront API, as we can see here. What we're putting in those query attributes within these web components is querying the Storefront API, but we don't actually have to write any GraphQL. We can just put what we're looking for in this query attribute on the web component, and Shopify does the GraphQL queries for us. So there you have it, guys, a quick little tutorial on Storefront Web Components. If you don't currently have a separate website that you need to enable somewhat of a Shopify storefront on, then you can of course just stick with themes, but obviously the option is now here if you need it in order to more easily bring elements from your Shopify store onto another website. Personally, it doesn't seem to solve a problem that I've seen any of my clients have who are happy working within Shopify themes to get the desired result, which just so happens to be the majority of what I cover here on this channel. So if you're interested in Shopify theme development, YouTube is going to recommend you a video somewhere on your screen, not sure where, to check out next, or just click on my channel title to find more of my videos. Happy coding, and I'll catch you in the next one.